There we go. The session is being recorded. Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Takata. I am the Adobe ColdFusion Technical Evangelist. Been here, I don't know, almost 3 years now. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the new GCP, the new Google Cloud Platform features that were released in Adobe ColdFusion earlier this summer. Okay, we added 3 main things, and I'm going to kind of go over them in the context of an app that I wrote, a silly little app that I wrote, which is actually an app that one of my customers had in production that I sort of copied and made my own version of it, since it was something that was being used in production by someone else. But before I start in on that, I have a couple of things I wanted to mention. The first one is Adobe ColdFusion Summit is coming in Vegas. It's coming soon. There is a link under some useful links. You do not want to miss this. If you've never been to a summit before, they are an amazing place to learn new things, network, meet friends, hire employees, or potentially find jobs. Some amazing people are going to be there talking. People have been doing this for decades. We'll be up there talking. We've got actually people who are new to Summit, but who have been doing ColdFusion for a long time. We actually have I want to say half a dozen people who have never spoken before to Summit are coming in. So we've got some fresh blood coming in. We've got amazing keynote speaker coming in on day 2. We're going to be talking about all the cool new stuff in CF 2024 in the keynote on the first day. So I just got to tell you, it's going to be rad. So if you can make it, beg, borrow, or steal away over to Vegas. The other thing that I wanted to start talking about actually in context with Google Cloud is, before I talk about the features in Google Cloud in ColdFusion, there's something really important that you need to be able to do before you start using any of these. And it's not necessarily an obvious thing. And so I'm going to just really quickly take you through that thing. So when you're using Google Cloud, you need to authenticate, obviously, right? You need to be able to go in and actually auth to your account. But it's not necessarily clear how you do that. In other places, there might be like a key, and you just take that key and you put it into your code. But that's actually problematic, right? If you've got it in GitHub or something, like, your key can get public, and then people can use your account, and it's real bad. So the way that GCP tends to do it, and the way that we set it up inside of CF, is you can actually get a service worker account with an authentication document, right? That document is in JSON, and you're able to actually download it, and then you'll point it in your code. I'm going to show you all of that. I'm going to show you the code that points to it, all of that. But before we do that, I just kind of wanted to show you what's going on in GCP and how to get there, because it's not obvious, okay? So basically what you want to do is you're going to actually go into your Google Cloud Console. I mean, first of all, you got to make a Google Cloud account, obviously, right? And you're going to want to enable something called IAM, right? If you don't do that, you're not going to have any of these links, and you're going to be like, what are you talking about, Mark? That makes no sense. That doesn't appear in my console. So once you've enabled that for your project, right? So sorry, you have to create a project, and then you enable this feature. And we're going to be doing that a lot. We're going to be enabling a lot of features for a particular project. My project is called GCP ColdFusion because I'm very creative. And once you do that, what you're going to do is you're going to go to the IAM and admin section here, and you're going to go to service accounts, okay? Now, there will be a service account here that is automatically created, but this is not the one that you want to use, okay? What you're actually going to want to do is you're going to go up here and say create service account, and you're going to create one with whatever name you want to give it. Again, super creative, GCP cred is what I called it, right? You're going to create that, And then once it's in here, and I'm not going to show you this because it would actually show my like key, which is partially shown here, and I don't want to do that because it's being recorded. Don't hack my stuff. What you'll do is you'll click that, and then there will be a drop down on the next page that says create key, and you'll choose JSON, and you will be able to download that credential one time. That's it. Once you've downloaded it and pulled that down, you cannot ever get it again. That's a security feature in case someone got into your account and was trying to pull stuff in. If you have to, if for whatever reason you lose that or someone gets that credential, you have to create a new one. It'll generate a new one. You'll have to put that in, and then you have to point to the new one again. So that's just something to keep in mind. So when you see in my code that I'm pointing to a particular place in my code for the credentials, that is the file that I'm using to generate that. And obviously, I'm not going to show it to you because, again, it's got like secret stuff and stuff. So anyway, okay. So with that out of the way, let's start talking about what was actually added. So we added three main things. So we added, and these are things that are used a lot across cloud, like we sort of tried to hit the biggest targets that were available there. So we hit storage. Oh, yes, and Dave makes a good point. Do not edit that file once you download it. Yes, it almost certainly will become invalid. Okay, so that's a really good point. Like, do not touch that. Like, for whatever reason, don't touch that. Like, if you need a new one, go download a new one, pull it down and put it in place, or else it'll blow everything up, which is bad. And also, when you if you're pushing your stuff to GitHub, ignore it, please. Right? don't push that file up to GitHub, because that's the whole point. You know, like it's a cert. So anyway, so we added storage, which GCP calls buckets because, I don't know, they're adorable. And we added something called FireStore. Okay, so FireStore is Google's version of a NoSQL serverless database. And it's pretty awesome. I gotta say, it's pretty awesome. I started off using Dynamo over on AWS and sort of low-key hated it. Like, it just wasn't friendly to me. The developer experience was sort of nasty. And I know, like, once you get it, it's fine. And it's also incredibly performant. It's awesome. Like, I don't want to talk bad about it, but just using it initially was kind of a bad experience for me. The immediate experience I had with FireStore is it was like fluffy bunny puppies with bows and balloons. Like, it's just so much friendlier and nicer to use than Dynamo or really most other NoSQL database. So I do love it. And if you want to love it too, Dave, speaking of CF Summit, my good friend Dave Ferguson will be doing a talk on FireStore at CF Summit. So definitely don't miss that if you're going to go, which you should. And then the last thing that we added support for is something called PubSub. And this is not well understood, I think, by a lot of people. Like people misunderstand what it is. It's known in some cases as like a messaging service. And so they think, oh, it's like Slack, or it's like ICQ. I'm dating myself on that one. Or, you know, or whatever. It's like, or it's SMS, right? It's like messaging. That's not what it is. Now, can you use it for that? Yeah, sure. You can use it as a transport mechanism to get to the services that do those things. But that's not what it's designed to do. It's actually application to application messaging. So you can create a message, you can create a subscriber for that message, and you can pull that message down. So I built a sort of unusual use case for it because I wanted to show you it in a full round trip. Like, I didn't want to build like multiple things and have to go here, there, and everywhere. It's be kind of confusing. So what I did is I actually built an auditing system for this app that I built. When you edit something, it actually will create an audit message that I then immediately read back to you, so you can kind of see what happened. The ideal scenario is that message would be subscribed to by an external system somewhere else that would then pull that audit message in and record it elsewhere, whether that's in another database or whatever. Okay, so we added support for that as well. Cool. All right. Any questions so far? I don't see any. Hold on. Okay. All right. So let's start off talking about storage. All right. Now, a lot of you have used S3. That's sort of the, 5,000-pound gorilla in the room. It's AWS's version of storage. And to be honest, it kind of works the same way over here. It's not quite as friendly as FireStore is, but it is still very, very, very friendly. And here's what you need to do to get it running. And I'm going to show you the actual console with it in a second. And then I'm going to show you the code that it takes to read and write from it also inside of my app in a moment as well. So first of all, you're going to have to create, again, your GCP account before using storage. If you have one already, great, you're set. You have to have a project. You have to make it so that cloud storage is assigned to that or turned on. Again, this is the pattern in Google. Like nothing is by default assigned to your projects. They do that because sometimes there's costs involved with those things, right? And so they're very careful. That's one of the things I like about GCP is they are very careful about making sure that you know what things are on your account and what the costs might be. There's dashboards and stuff that kind of show you what you're paying for all that. And then you're going to create a bucket. It's that's sort of their metaphor for where you're storing things with a name, right? So let me kind of show you that. Oh, and then really important, if you want the things that you're uploading to the bucket to be visible to everyone, it is critical that you add read permissions for the user, all users, as storage/storage object viewer. It's critical. If you don't do that, basically you can't see any of your stuff, and it's no fun. Okay, so here it is. Here's what it looks like on GCP, right? So as you can see, I'm in my project, GCP ColdFusion, and I've got a bucket. I'm going to go back out to all my buckets. I only have one. I only have one bucket. When creating a bucket, you're going to be asked kind of where you want it, right? You're going to be asked what's the what's the word I'm looking for? Like how easy it is to get to the data, whether it's like always warmed up, whether it's like near, whether it's cold storage, right? So for what we're doing here, I just want it to just be, it's a place that I'm storing stuff. I'm going to store images in here as it so happens, right? So, and I named it CF Summit Bucket Demo. I actually did this for Summit on the East Coast. So here it is. Now, what is all this? Student IDs. Well, this is one of the cool things about storage. Once you've created a bucket, you can actually create these folders that you're going to put stuff into very, very easily by, and I'll show you the code that does this, by essentially saying, okay, this is going to be the key, and that key has a folder name and then the name of the actual file. Okay. So here I'm actually collecting images that are student ID images. Very cool. And I'm dropping them into this bucket called CF Summit bucket. And here they are. So these are two that I have in here. And those images are actually these two images of this schmuck up here and this very adorable puppy, whose name is not Mark Takata. We're going to have to edit that. And I'll show you a little bit about that. Okay, so that's cool. But how does the code work for that? All right. So essentially what I do here, let me start at the beginning on this, because this app is, while fairly simple, it's got a couple of pieces. So let me just kind of go through it real fast. This is using ColdFusion and HTMX. Okay, so there's a section in the middle of the page that's a viewport, and that viewport is pulling back either add student or list students. And then inside of add students, it's just it's a form, right? Now, something that I did have to do in this case, and by the way, all this code will be on my GitHub if you want to grab it. one of the things that I did have to do is do a little bit of like stupid JavaScript tricks to make sure that if I'm editing, if I set a particular name for a file that I'm uploading, that I keep that name and the file itself in a couple of different variables and make sure that those get passed so that when I save it, all of that is there and correct and hasn't been like mucked up by changing the image. So I'm doing that by actually grabbing some values from the file name, right? And when I post this, I'm posting this to newid.cfm. And again, like this is like a very basic site. Like what you would want to do, obviously, is you'd want to have all these things in CFCs. You'd want to call to them, right? I wanted to kind of have things more in line so you could see what each of them do. Okay, so here's new ID. What am I doing in here? So I'm doing a couple things. I'm going to skip the FireStore part for now. I'm going to get to that when we get to FireStore. But I'm starting off by using, this is a new thing in ColdFusion called get storage handle. And into that, I'm going to be passing a few things. So first, I'm going to be creating something called GCP cred, which is the credentials that are going to be passed to get into get cloud service. And that includes the project ID. If you remember, that was the project ID on GCP, right? And then here's the thing I was talking about earlier with JSON, right? So I am actually passing in a path to my JSON file, which is this here. And this is the one that I downloaded originally. Now, if I lose this one, if my laptop gets, I don't know, eaten by a bear, and it's no longer existing because I haven't put it anywhere, I would have to end up downloading something new and changing this to point to the new file. Okay. I'm going to be doing this a lot. Now, again, this is one of those things like, why would you do this like 20 times? Well, because I want it to be very clear what I'm doing each time, right? You could probably create the GCP cred in like a global, right? And just reuse that because this is not going to change for you. Those credentials will be the same in every single thing that we do, whether it's FireStore, whether it's storage, PubSub, whatever, right? Now, what will change is the config, right? So in this case, I'm actually going to be using the service name storage. Cool. Okay. Now I'm going to pass it into get cloud storage, and I'm going to return the return from this. And now I'm actually going to upload in this case, an image, right? It can be anything, can be any file that can be uploaded up to, a limit. And the limit is pretty high. But remember, you're paying for it, right? So you're paying for ingress, outgress, all that. So keep in mind, this is cloud, right? So this isn't free. You are paying a tiny, minute little amount for doing all of the reads and writes and whatever. I think last month I paid 85 cents for my demos. Yeah, so not going broke anytime soon on that. But it's something to keep in mind, right? If you have a site that's pulling down a lot of stuff all the time, you might want to think about a CDN somewhere that's maybe a little bit cheaper, or a different kind of storage, and check all the different clouds for their storage prices depending on what you need, right? Okay, so what are we doing here? So I set the storage object, and then this is a ColdFusion thing that we added. So storage object.bucket is going to be CF Summit Bucket Demo, which is the name of the bucket. And I'm going to actually pull in the value from the form of the picture. And now I'm going to create that key. Remember, I told you that there was a key that's going to have a folder and the actual file name, right? So if you look here, student ID / matches, oopsie, boop. So you have Summit Bucket Demo and student IDs. So that matches that. All right. And then I'm going to go ahead and upload it. And I'm going to set return struct. Okay, so what this does is when bucket object.upload file passes in your file and the file name and the key, right? it's going to return back a struct with some data about what happened, right? Now, what you should probably do here is make sure it didn't error, right? You might want to, I don't know, make sure it didn't time out, maybe check the performance, do metrics, whatever. In my case, all I want back from it is the link that's created when I upload it, right? So when I push this up to Google Cloud, it's going to actually create what in their parlance is called a media link. And that media link is the source for each of these two images here on the left. Okay. Hopefully everyone's following along. Pretty simple there, right? Okay, so that's storage. So that's reading back, right? So the media link is the way you read it back. Pretty simple, right? You need to make sure you know what that link is and save it somewhere. In our case, I'm going to save it into FireStore, which is the next thing I'm going to be showing you. And then you just put it into an image. And I can show you in List Students when I go and grab stuff from FireStore, which I'm going to show you in a second. I'm actually creating an image. Whoa, come on. An image here. And when I do the get data, I'm getting the image link value, which in FireStore is here. So this link here actually describes the path to the image in the bucket, which I saved from the return struct from uploading everything. I hope that's not too confusing. Okay, so let me go then to FireStore. Okay, so what is FireStore? As I mentioned, it's serverless. It's a NoSQL database. What does that mean? Okay, so it's serverless, meaning that it's basically cold until you need it, versus a server that you've got running all the time, the meter's ticking, right? You've got some kind of maybe a VM, maybe a container running with it, right? This is not that. Right now, of course, you can have a serverless container Cloud Run in GCP, and I did a talk on that last month. But in this case, you don't need any of that. It just runs serverless out of the box. So as far as costs go, that really lowers your cost. I think there's a free tier. Also, you get a certain number of hits back and forth for free every month. For a lot of people, that'll pretty much cover all their usage, which is nice, especially if you're learning. You won't have to, necessarily be charged a lot of money for it, which is awesome. And then NoSQL, kind of out of scope for this talk, but essentially there's the way that it's not a relational database. It's not like, Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle, right? It's more of they call them like document databases, or I've heard like all these different names, vector databases. Like, so you can basically they're schemaless. Although of course Dynamo, you can't have a schema, which is confusing, but not going to get into that right now. All right. So how do you use it? Again, make sure you have an account. Make sure that FireStore is enabled for your project that you already have. And then what? Well, this is where FireStore is pretty darn cool. You can create a collection for it to write into, or not, because when you do your first write, you're going to actually name the collection. And what FireStore does is, if it doesn't see that collection, it's just going to create it, and it's going to add your data to it, which I got to say is pretty darn cool, right? Yeah, it's kind of a neat thing. Like, usually you have to know your table and your column, like you have to know all these things. In this case, no, you don't need that. It just kind of goes. Now, is that problematic occasionally? Yes, definitely. Especially if like the name that you're putting in is dynamic and whoopsie, you misspelled it. Well, now you've got two different collections. That's not good, right? So you do have to be careful, obviously. So, friendly sometimes turns into a mess. But I like this. It makes it very approachable, right? And then in your code, you're going to create your key value set. You're going to insert it, and then I'll show you how to pull that back. So let's take a look real quick here about what this looks like actually in FireStore. Okay. So, oopsie. So here we are in FireStore. My database ID is just default, and something that Dave can talk about in his talk, or maybe he wants to mention it here. There can be a little bit of like fluffing and fuzzing here with the names. Like if you have multiple databases, this can get a little bit confusing. I don't, so I'm cheating. But a lot of you may only have one database, and that's fine. So I'm just going to drop in. Of course, when you create it, it's going to ask you where you want to host it. Like different places for hosting it have different costs. Yeah, so Dave, I thought they added the ability to have multiple ones. I swear I just saw that. If not, then that's easier. That's good. Okay, well, never mind. Never mind. So yeah, so default is it, right? Now, here's your collection. And again, super creatively, I named it Student IDs because this is a student ID app that I'm building, right? And I've got a couple of entries here. I've got John Smith, very famous, and I've got my, image link, which you can see there. And they've got a unique ID. So you might ask, well, how do I know which thing to edit, right? Well, they all have unique IDs that get generated that you can then use to do edits on them, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. And these are all things I made up, right? So, and obviously, like the school that I got this idea for how to make the student ID manager, they had way more stuff in there, right? Like they had, like what school the person was part of, because they had some like whether they were graduate students or undergrad, like all sorts of things. They had this really complex app, and it was all running on Oracle, and it was an absolute nightmare to try and like take care of and whatever. It was a lot of fun. Written in ColdFusion, by the way. It was something I worked on, and I converted from, oh goodness, CF10 to CF 2016 a while back, or 2018. Sorry, it was 2018 when I was working there, like, I don't know, 5 years ago, something like that. 2018 had just come out. So anyway, cool. Okay, so that's what it looks like in GCP. What does the code look like, Mark? I'm glad you asked. Okay, so I showed you how to upload a picture, right? But let's start with how to get your FireStore stuff set up. So again, we're going to do a function called get FireStore handle. We're going to pass a cred in. And the cred's exactly the same as it was for storage, right? So you got your project, you got your creds, right? It's a file. It's a JSON file that I downloaded earlier. You're going to create a config, and you'll see the service name here is FireStore, right? So different, right? So it's different than storage. And then in this case, instead of storage, I name it DB. I say get cloud service, and I pass in GCP cred and config and return DB. Okay, scrolling down. So here I'm creating a function that's going to create a student, and these are the things I'm passing into it, right? And so these are the key value pairs that are going to be passed into the database later on. And you'll notice, right, like, oh, I actually create unique ID. Never mind. So I'm actually creating a unique ID. Sorry, I take that back. I thought that FireStore actually created that themselves. Okay, so this is a function that's going to be doing that. Now, there's some things in here. I'm checking form values. This is all cruft, right? Like this is just making sure that I didn't do something stupid like not put in a first name or a last name, blah, blah, blah. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. There's some like validation stuff that you could use out of the box. So I make sure that the form values are done. I upload the picture, and then I start to go in and I insert. I'm going to insert the student, right? So I'm using create UID for unique ID because I'm going to use that later to be able to edit. And I create your student, and I'm doing that from the unique ID plus my form fields, right? Including image link. And if you remember, I created image link earlier when I uploaded and got back the request struct from the bucket, right? So I'm going from one service to another and pulling that data in. And then, boop, I'm going to do a insert. I'm going to set the document to be the name of the unique ID. Okay, so that's how we're going to know that that's the unique ID for the student. I'm going to pass in student to that. I'm going to commit it. And then in this case, I'm just writing an output record created for student. So let's see how that works. So let's go here. So this is a list of students, right? But let's add a student. So I'm going to add John Barrett is a new student at my school. John is definitely 21. Right, John? And need a photo. Let's see. Let's use a fun photo of John. I don't know. This one. That's not actually John, in case anyone's wondering. All right, now I'm going to actually save this ID. And what's happening in the back is it's doing all those things that I told you about earlier, where it's reading and writing. Now I should probably have a little swirly gig here. I should just make sure that this is not crashing. I tested everything else. 1 second. Oh, that did crash. Ha. First name. Of course, Mark. Okay. So, funny story there. I had a space at the end of his name. So what I should have done is actually done a little more validation on the values. That's a little hint there for Mark to be a better programmer than he is. Okay, so what happened? It inserted John. It put the little funny image of John in there, the year, freshman. Okay, but down here, this is wrong. That's not John Smith. That's Mark Takata. And that's Gus. That's Gus the bus, right? So let's go ahead and edit this, right? So let's actually edit and put this name correctly. I'm not 17, 19. Duh, right? And the image is correct, so we're just going to leave it. I'm going to go ahead and save the ID. So what it's doing right now is it's going through and it found my unique ID and it's doing an update of the data that's there. But here's an additional thing that it's doing, okay? So behind the scenes, this actually generated a PubSub message with all of the information that was updated at this point. And you could add literally anything that you wanted here. You could add who I was logged in as, my IP address, the time of day, whatever you want to do, you could put it in here and create an audit field that then gets pushed somewhere else. Now, I pushed it straight back to the screen because, it wanted it not to be too confusing, right? But let's take a look at all of that as well. So let's hop back into here and talk a little bit about PubSub. Again, how do you do PubSub? Well, you turn it on, right? You assign it to your project, exactly the same, right? And I created an audit function for editing a student, and then I created the message subscription to that for it to be read immediately back. Now, again, ideally, you'd have some other external process to either write this to a file or to a DB or whatever. You could spread this out. You could spread this load out across servers if you wanted to as well. But let's take a look at this code. Again, this is something that is not super well understood by a lot of folks, including me, to be totally honest. But let's take a look and see what this is actually doing. Okay. So the code that we want to look at is here. And again, I'm passing in my GCP cred for it. Now, there's a config that is set up inside of my my application.cfc that's creating like a session config ID, basically. And I'm doing this because, again, like this is sort of hand waving, right? I'm not actually creating unique messages that are being read somewhere else and destroyed. And, you know, basically messages are supposed to be sent out, subscribed to, read, and destroyed. Like that's sort of their circle. This is not, you're not recording into a DB. That's a separate process. Like this is just the messaging part of it, right? That's kind of hard to show. So I, again, did a little hand waving and I create some like random UUID based IDs that get thrown up at the session, which is fun. Then I'm going to set a topic name, and then I'm going to create a subscription for it. And then I'm going to create a snapshot. Okay. And then I pass that snapshot in with the metadata, and I actually create the data and I'm pushing it out to the screen here. Hopefully this basically makes sense. So I'm doing a topic.publish, right? And then I use that message response to write that out to the screen. I just loop through whatever messages happen to be in it, and I just dump it to the screen. Again, would you normally do that? No. It'd be weird to do that. Why would you do that? This is literally supposed to be a different system that it's messaging to, that's going to be subscribed to it and doing whatever the heck you want with that message. I mean, this could be anything. This could be an error. This could be people requesting help. This could be someone emailing and triggering a different process that maybe then sends an SMS or something using Twilio, whatever that thing happens to be that you want it to do. This is what it's supposed to do. I'm just kind of showing like, oh, I did this thing and it like generated this message, and then I'm immediately showing it instead. Hold on. So, right. Okay. So if you look in GCP itself, this is what the PubSub section looks like. And there's not actually a ton here, to be totally honest, right? This is, you see there's a couple of topics that I've created, right? You can click into them and it'll have a bunch of like the metadata. You can set this up to be exported to cloud storage. So that's another thing that this could do. Instead of reading it back directly to where you're going, you could actually push this out to a text or Avro file. You could export that data to a BigQuery table. If you remember, I was saying you could put this into a different DB somewhere else, right? And theoretically, systems like this could be generating an absolute ton of data all the time in these messages. The reason why you're offloading it is to take that load off the server, right? So instead of doing like, oh, somebody like clicked something and it generates a thing, and having that be a call to your database, which then like, you know, kind of loads up your DB, you send it off somewhere else, it's asynchronous, it runs on a different system, and you're good to go. So anywho, yeah, you got like row content here, the project name, right? Tons and tons of stuff in here. You can like actually change the permissions for this if you need this to be read by something else, if you need to lock it down, whatever you need it to do. So anyway, so that's pretty much the talk. I'm sure everyone has questions about a variety of things. So come at me, bro. and bro. Who has questions? Oh, I better change Gus. He's going to be mad. Gus. So there's a link for my GitHub. It's not up yet because I usually upload these after. And you'll find it in my webinars under, I don't know, I guess I'll call it Google Cloud Platform features. There will be a section for that. It'll have my PowerPoint, and it'll have all the code except for my config. Obviously, my credentials won't be there. You'll have to generate that and update the code to point to those yourself. Yeah, no problem. That's a good question, Brendan. So Firestore is like a simplified version of Firebase. It's kind of like that, except I feel like, so I've only really seen one demo of Firebase. A core key component of Firebase is that it's real time. Okay, so whereas Firestore is more of a traditional, it's a traditional NoSQL serverless, right? Which is a funny statement to make out loud. But Firebase is more about things like gaming. So the demo that I saw, which was amazing, I saw it at an IoT conference, and essentially what the speaker had done is they took a button, it's IoT, right? So it was a button that made a call to a server and used Firestore to switch something on off. And that was actually attached to a light that was sitting next to it. And that light basically continuously had it was kind of like a WebSocket or like a SignalR type of thing. When she hit the button, the light changed, which was the most expensive and difficult light change ever done, is what she said. But that was more of the type of thing that it's meant for, like really like fast, real-time changes. Firestore is not like that. Like it's much more of a thing that you might use, day to day. It's a little bit easier to integrate with stuff as well. You kind of have to be in the ecosystem of Google more fully for Firebase than Firestore. Coming from an RDB background, so Dave Ferguson asked, coming from a relational database background, what is the hardest concept of NoSQL Firestore that was the hardest to grasp? That's a great question. Well, I could be an idiot and tell you all of it, which has a modicum of truth to it. Really, the biggest concept that is difficult to really grasp is the idea that there's no schema. That the schema is fluid. You have to think fluidly, right? You could pass in and even if you look at my code, like a lot of the things in my code probably would break. I mean, definitely would break if the way the schema was set up changed, right? So really, you should be like looping back through a query and pulling back like the keys and then returning the keys so that it's like more fluid and dynamic. You don't have to worry about that with a relational database. You know the column names, right? Like they're there. You know the relationships between tables. That's the entire. It's like the entire thing. It's table stakes. It's like what the whole thing runs on, right? With that gone, the idea of a data. I mean, I have trouble even calling it a database. It's like a data store or a document store. Becomes a little bit like difficult to wrap your mind around until you start making things with it, and then it's cool. Then it just works. It's easy. It's not that hard at that point. But that was really my biggest sort of hurdle initially, and this was long before I got into this stuff. Like this was in Mongo. Dynamo was, oh my goodness, yeah. Dynamo like punishes you if you don't understand those concepts. Like you really need to know what it is because it'll blow up otherwise. Okay, I think I've got something in my Q&A pod. Dooped. Oh yeah, Brendan actually asked that question in chat also. So yeah, was that a good answer, Dave? You're not convincing me, Dave. Oh yeah. Oh, I don't even want to. Yeah, I've heard about graphing DBs. That's my brain is too tiny for that, Dave. I'll leave that to the crazy database experts. There's an entire world of like data storage that I am just terrified to even dip a toe into. Like it's there's some amazing things that people are doing, and it's fun and it's cool and it's very useful. Um, but yeah, I'm not there yet. Yeah, I've heard that. Yes, right. The data does. Oh, the data almost doesn't matter. Right. Cool. Let me think. Is there anything else I wanted to cover? I don't think so. Okay. So I'm going to stick around for a while. If people have questions, they can put it in the Q&A pod. They can put it into the chat if you would like. I'll be here for another 15 minutes until 11, and then I will come off. So if you want to chat, if you have questions about this or any other thing, happy to do that. In the meanwhile, this is my LinkedIn and my email. Please feel free to connect over LinkedIn. Or email me if you have questions as well that you don't want to put here necessarily. My door is always open. If you have feedback, please go ahead and give it to me. I'd love to hear it. If you want to ask who does my hair, hint, it's me. Welcome, Ruben. Oh, I love HTMX, Brendan. I love it. I love it. I love it. I've been using it for a really long time. I actually was using it before it was HTMX. So the author of that originally was a gentleman named Carson Gross. He actually lives in the same town as I do, which is how I met Carson. I actually went to, so I've been a part of the JavaScript meetup group here for a very long time, about a decade. And I actually saw him give a talk on Intercooler, which is the old name of HTMX. I want to say like 8 years ago, something like that, maybe 10 years ago. And I just thought, holy moly, this is like a really cool tech. Like I like the way that this does things, and started using it. And I used to actually use HTMX or Intercooler and ColdFusion. I called it the chili stack because I'm silly and chili. And my first talks at Summit, long before I was the evangelist here, actually were ColdFusion and Intercooler. So been doing that a really long time. It's super neat. I would also say, if you're interested in that type of server-side rendering type of methodology, definitely check out Hotwire. It's made by the Rails folks, and it's really cool. Ben Nadal is using it. He's got a bunch of like cool blogs, a few videos on how he's using it. Definitely a little bit of a different way of thinking than HTMX. For me, HTMX is easier, but again, I've been using it a decade, so you know. But the Hotwire stuff is also very, very cool. Like the way that they figured out how to make things work is very similar and also very cool to HTMX. You're welcome, John. Yeah, definitely. There's definitely, I would say, if you're not used to HTMX, give it a minute. Because you're like, wait, I'm returning back like entire documents and pages and fragments. Yeah, that's what you're doing. It's harkening back to the ideas of hypermedia. It uses a concept called Hadios, hypermedia as the engine of state, which is a very old concept. It's actually a concept that was born of the original REST ideology that came from a PhD thesis by a guy many years ago, long before JSON even existed. So it's kind of like a return to form in some ways. And if you're really, really good at ColdFusion, and maybe not so good at JavaScript, it's a really good way to create a dynamic, asynchronous, reactive type of application without getting, stuck in the weeds learning Vue or React or Next or Alpine or whatever crazy new JS framework comes. Dave says, oh, fun tip. The project ID in the config doesn't matter for FireStore. It only uses the project ID in the JSON creds file. Good point. Good point. Actually, I've never tried that. They were always the same for me, but that's a good tip, Dave. Make sure you don't change them. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, those docs are pretty new, so there definitely are going to be a few whoopsie daisies in there. So definitely appreciate you pointing those out. Very helpful. Right on. Okie dokie. Oh, goodness. We are definitely going to have fun in Vegas. I really hope a lot of you can join us. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead. If there's no more questions that people have, I'm just going to hang out and chat, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so there's a little bit less for Apurva to edit later. So it's not just editing me sitting here like chatting with all of y'all.